My name is Zaid. I was 35 years old when I sat in the luxurious cabin of my custom-designed private jet, cruising the skies between Dubai and London, and realized that my life, a masterpiece of ambition, power and success, was spiritually and emotionally bankrupt. I had everything the world defined as power, a global empire built on logistics and technology, unlimited liquid wealth, and the unquestioning respect of global financiers and regional potentates. But inside I was suffocating. My pursuit of more had not brought freedom. It had constructed a gilded cage of my own making. That day, I began the terrifying journey to trade my earthly kingdom for a relationship with Jesus Christ. And the price was far higher than any business deal I had ever brokered. I was born into a dominant, established commercial dynasty in the heart of the Arabian Gulf. Our family's influence was not in the religious hierarchy or the political arena, but in the untouchable world of commerce and capital. My father was a Titan Ace self-made man who turned a modest trading house into a regional conglomerate spanning logistics, strategic real estate, and high-tech infrastructure development. He was relentless, utterly ruthless, and internationally respected. From my earliest memories, I was groomed not for piety, but for absolute power and exponential success. The atmosphere in our home was not one of familial warmth, but of a high-stakes 24/7 corporate headquarters. My tutors, sourced from the most exclusive schools, taught me advanced financial modeling, complex derivatives, and M&A negotiation strategy before I was old enough to drive. I earned degrees from the West's most prestigious business schools, but my true punishing education took place in my father's windowless boardroom. My father's love was a performance bonus. It was entirely conditional, tied directly to my ability to expand the empire, eliminate rivals, and demonstrate zero-error execution. Failure was not a setback. It was a personal, intellectual, and spiritual disgrace that risked the family name. I remember vividly at age 12, losing a chess match to an outside mentor. My father watched the entire game silently. Afterward, he didn't console me. He said, "Zaid, in business, there are no second-place prizes. The competitor who leaves you alive today will kill you tomorrow. You must be merciless with your own shortcomings." From that moment, I understood that I was not working to build a company. I was working to earn my father's love and, by extension, God's favor. By age 30, I was installed as CEO. I systematically doubled the company's valuation in 5 years through aggressive acquisitions and groundbreaking moves into sovereign technology infrastructure. We were ruthless and hostile takeovers, and I personally led the negotiations that secured exclusive rights to major regional trade routes. I commanded a multinational workforce of 20,000. I owned luxury properties from Manhattan to Singapore. My private office, spanning the top floor of our gleaming 70-story skyscraper, was a monument to my singular brilliance. My public persona was immaculate. Zaid al-Farsi, the genius strategist, the man who never lost the embodiment of modern, successful Arab ambition. My religious life was merely a component of my corporate governance. I performed the 5 daily prayers and the annual rituals, but these acts were tools of self-discipline, respect for the social order, and public image management. My prayers were less about seeking communion with God and more about maintaining mental focus and ensuring my decision-making remained sharp and my moral compass, as defined by public ethics, was pristine. I genuinely believed that God rewarded the powerful and the materially successful. My vast wealth was in my mind, irrefutable proof of divine selection, a reward for my excellent conduct and unmatched ambition. I was the master of my own destiny, and I saw God as a silent, approving chairman who simply ratified my perfect execution. The psychological cost was immense. The thrill of conquering a rival or acquiring a new asset died almost instantly. The high was fleeting, lasting only until the next target was identified. My life became an endless cycle of more. Faster, bigger, yet the interior satisfaction was dwindling to zero. I was the richest man in any room, but also the most spiritually starved. My social life was a sterile arrangement of necessary networking. My personal relationships were transactional. The silence in my massive, opulent penthouse felt like the cold of deep space. I was succeeding brilliantly at the world's game, but I was utterly failing at the game of life. The first structural cracks in my perfect life began with an unexpected and humiliating business failure. We had invested aggressively, leveraging enormous capital, into a high-stakes, revolutionary sovereign technology initiative that promised to redefine a significant sector. The project, which I personally championed, collapsed spectacularly. It was due not to my error, but to unforeseen complex international regulatory changes that I could not have predicted or controlled. The resulting loss was over $3 billion US dollars, a sum that, while not bankrupting the entire firm, was a catastrophic blow to my professional identity. For the first time in my life, I could not use money, intellect, or power to control the outcome. My genius, my network, my wealth, they were all utterly useless against an external, chaotic, and uncontrollable force. I fell into a deep, paralyzing anxiety. I couldn't sleep. I paced my empty palace for hours, grappling with the terrifying realization that my entire self-worth was based on the illusion of my own invincibility. The truth was, I was just as vulnerable as the poorest man on the street. I simply had more insulation. It was during this crisis, this intense period of fear and insomnia, that I began to search desperately for a source of certainty that lay beyond the financial markets. I devoured philosophical texts, looking for a logical system that could explain suffering, failure, and the inherent fragility of human systems. This led me through a complicated trail of historical philosophy to an ancient Western text that repeatedly referenced the Bible. I initially dismissed the text as another relic of a failed, idealistic Western ideology, but my intellectual curiosity, the one thing my father had fostered, was piqued. I needed to understand the foundational worldview of the civilization that was now financially challenging my own. I wanted to find its weaknesses. I ordered a discreet, high-end, leather-bound scholarly edition of the Bible, shipped from a private contact to my London office, and placed it securely in a hidden, fireproof safe behind a false wall. I told myself I was studying the political theology of global finance, searching for historical precedents of economic collapse. I began reading the Old Testament, focusing on the wisdom literature. Ecclesiastes, written by the richest and wisest man in history, struck me with the force of a personal indictment. The author spoke of the absolute futility of all human endeavor, the endless chasing after wind, and the meaningless vanity of wealth. The sleep of a laborer is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. These words, written thousands of years ago, were a perfect clinical description of my own chronic insomnia and my existential dread. Zaid Al-Farsi, the billionaire entrepreneur, was a living illustration of vanity. My life was defined by the very emptiness the writer condemned. I then reached the book of Job, which shattered my merit-based worldview. Job was the wealthiest, most righteous man of his time, the perfect CEO model yet. He lost everything not because of sin or failure, but as part of a mysterious divine transaction. This directly contradicted my lifelong belief that virtue equals reward. If wealth was not a guaranteed blessing for righteousness, then my entire life's calculation was wrong. The true intellectual paradox began with the Gospels. I expected Jesus to be a powerful figure, perhaps an economic king, offering a guaranteed formula for spiritual investment, a secret to never losing. Instead, I found a man with no property, no political power, and a shocking disrespect for the established religious and financial authorities. He taught a completely inverted economy, one based on giving, losing, and self-sacrifice. He spoke of the unconditional value of a tiny sparrow and the infinite worth of the human soul. This challenged my core capitalist logic. Everything must have a return on investment. The soul, according to Jesus, was the only asset with infinite value, yet it was not tradable or earnable. The concept of grace was the ultimate intellectual and business paradox. My entire life was built on merit, on earning every dollar, every shred of respect, and every divine favor. Every relationship, every contract, every reward was conditional. The legal system I grew up under was strictly transactional. Sin equals consequence, but Jesus offered his life as a free gift, requiring only faith, a non-monetary, non-merit-based deposit. My mind rejected it. I saw it as a terrible business model. Infinite reward for zero required investment. I wrestled with the parables, forcing them through a business filter. The parable of the workers in the vineyard. This enraged me. The workers hired late in the day received the same pay as those who worked all day. This was a violation of fair labor law. It was unjust and inefficient. It flew in the face of every capitalist principle I held sacred. But the owner's response: am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or is your eye envious because I am generous? Forced me to confront the difference between human law and divine sovereignty. God's generosity is not bound by my sense of fairness. The parable of the talents. This was familiar territory. Investing what you have been given, but the point was not the profit. It was the master's joy and the reward for faithfulness. The reward was entrance into the master's joy, not just a bigger portfolio. The pearl of great price. A merchant sells everything he owns to buy one pearl. I understood the profit motive. A priceless asset is worth liquidating everything. The pearl, the kingdom of heaven, was the ultimate ROI, but the catch was that the price of that pearl was not a monetary sum. It was everything I already possessed and valued on earth. Mark 8:36 became the sentence that judged my soul. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? I had gained a significant portion of the world, and I was, by this equation, facing the forfeiture of my only truly infinite asset. My soul, which I thought was secured by my public works and perfect conduct, was empty and condemned by its own staggering arrogance. The entire framework of my life was a losing trade. The full weight of my conviction came when I realized I could not intellectually reconcile the ethics of Christ with the life I was living. Every traditional prayer I led, every business deal I closed that involved legal but unethical exploitation of a loophole felt like a deliberate lie to myself and to God. I found a contact through my secret reading, a subtle coded mention in an online forum dedicated to ethical finance that led me to a discreet meeting. This led me to a small secret community of believers operating under extreme vigilance in my home city. My first meeting was an act of extreme paranoia. I wore simple clothes of disguise. It was held in a secure, unassuming basement apartment in a working-class district I wouldn't have known existed a year prior. I sat there, the multi-billionaire in the tailored Italian suit, listening to construction workers, school teachers, and simple laborers share a joy and peace that no amount of money could buy. They spoke of a life redeemed by sacrifice, not earned by effort. I spoke privately with the pastor, a man named Khalil, whose eyes held a deep, unshakable peace. I asked him, I voiced a whisper, Khalil, how do I reconcile my ambition? How do I serve Christ and run a multinational corporation? I can reform the company's ethics. Khalil smiled gently, a look of profound pity for my intellectual pride. Zaid, you are asking the wrong question. You are asking how to fit God into your empire. God is asking you to surrender your empire and your ownership to Him. Your life is not your own. You must choose which master to serve. You cannot serve both God and Mammon. I returned to my office, to my private jet, to my palace, and every object felt like a heavy chain. My ambition felt like a cancer. I knelt in the prayer room of my own home, the room where I had performed thousands of mechanical prayers, and delivered the most honest, desperate prayer of my life. Lord Jesus, I surrender. I choose you over my empire. I choose you over my Father's approval. I choose you over the certainty of my own success. I can't earn you. I accept your free gift. Forgive my pride and take my life. The peace that followed was immediate, overwhelming, and utterly irrational. The anxiety that had gripped me for months dissolved, but the storm of consequences was only just beginning to form. My transformation was not a private matter. It was immediately visible in my corporate actions. I stopped making deals that involved legal, yet morally ambiguous exploitation of resources or people. I began allocating company funds to genuine charitable work that would yield zero PR return. I started treating my employees with profound, unexpected respect, not as assets to be optimized. I began publicly discussing my belief that all success is a gift, not an earned right, a radical, dangerous statement in my culture's business circles. The first person to confront me was my father. He didn't care about my soul. He cared about the bottom line and the family honor. He summoned me to the boardroom, where the entire family and all the senior executives were present for a staged intervention. Zaid, my father hissed, his voice dangerously low. Your decisions are affecting the valuation. Your soft approach is bleeding profit and attracting unwanted scrutiny. You are acting like a religious fool. Father, I responded, my voice now steady. No longer shaking, I am operating by a new standard. Profit at the expense of justice and compassion is not the standard of the God I serve. My father's face contorted with cold fury. God rewards the powerful. He rewards the disciplined mind. You are throwing away your destiny for a foolish foreign cult. The confrontation was brutal. He finally discovered my secret Bible and my association with a clandestine church. for a man whose legacy was built on absolute control and respectability. This was the ultimate betrayal, not only an act of religious apostasy, but an act of corporate treason that compromised the firm's stability. The disownment was swift, formal, and devastating. He used his authority to remove me entirely from the company, citing gross negligence, intellectual instability, and risk to shareholder value. My entire inheritance, including all my personal investments, was immediately revoked and transferred to my younger, completely compliant cousin. He orchestrated a public narrative that painted me as a reckless visionary who had suffered a nervous breakdown. I was escorted out of my own global headquarters by security I had hired. I left with one small briefcase containing my personal documents, a small amount of non-traceable cash, and my well-worn Bible. I was a multi-billionaire one day, and the next I was a wealthy, yet exiled man holding the equivalent of a few months' modest living expenses. My empire, the identity I had spent my life building, was gone. The isolation was crushing. The world that had celebrated Zaid al-Farsi simply vanished. My friends stopped calling. My wife filed for an immediate, high-profile divorce, taking the last remaining personal assets and publicly stating she married a CEO, not a religious fanatic. I was utterly alone, a political and financial refugee in a neighboring country where I had to actively hide my true identity and past wealth to avoid complications with my home government and to stay safe. I had to start over. I deliberately avoided using my small cash reserves, forcing myself to experience what it meant to earn a living without the leverage of capital. I used my linguistic and analytical skills to work as a freelance financial consultant for small, nonprofit organizations and tiny local businesses. The pay was negligible, but the work was honest and purifying. I took a job in a small, cramped office analyzing data for a humanitarian aid group, a far cry from analyzing global market trends. This was not a business. It was service. I learned how to use a copy machine, how to commute on crowded public transport, and what it felt like to be ignored. The biggest lesson was the spiritual one, the economy of scarcity. In my old life, my mind automatically solved every problem with a checkbook. Now, I had to solve problems with humility, prayer, and trust. When the rent was due and the funds were low, I had to pray for literal provision, not just call my bank manager. I experienced small miraculous provisions. A client paying early, a sudden, unexpected project that meant more than any billion-dollar deal. I was learning to trust in God's daily bread, not my future portfolio. The true rebuilding, however, was spiritual. I became deeply involved with the hidden Christian community that had helped facilitate my escape. My massive intellect, once a tool for crushing corporate competition, became a powerful tool for the kingdom. I started mentoring other seeking professionals, doctors, lawyers, engineers, and business people who were also trapped in the gilded cages of Middle Eastern success. They saw my story, a man who lost the world and gained peace. My experience proved that the gospel was not for the simple or the weak. It was for the strongest, the ones who finally realize that even their genius is futile against spiritual reality. I worked with an international ministry to translate key theological concepts into culturally relevant business world Arabic, creating an economy of grace curriculum. I broke down concepts like merit, debt payment, and gift to explain the gospel's transaction. Sin is infinite debt. The cross is a 100% principal and interest payment by an eternal guarantor. Grace is a non-refundable, Non-taxable, non-earned gift of equity. Faith is the transfer of ownership. I found that I was finally using my corporate genius for a purpose that yielded eternal, non-corruptible returns. I met Dr. Amir the surgeon and showed him that Jesus didn't require perfect surgery. He required a surrendered heart. I met Ferris, the real estate developer trapped in guilt, and showed him that the cost of his sin had already been paid, and his only recourse was repentance and restitution. Not self-condemnation, my journey has taught me this. The pursuit of earthly success, no matter how magnificent, is an addiction to a finite, depreciating resource. My empire was built on the shaky foundation of my own pride and intellect. When the foundation shifted, everything fell. I lost my name, my lineage, and my billion-dollar valuation. But in return, I gained the one investment that never depreciates: the unconditional love of Jesus Christ and the certainty of my eternal citizenship. The peace I found in my small, simple apartment surrounded by the genuine love of my new spiritual family is infinitely more valuable than the suffocating isolation of my palace. I thank God for the $3 billion failure that exposed the futility of my success. The cross was the one deal I couldn't negotiate, the one price I couldn't pay, and the one gifts I couldn't earn. I am no longer Zaid al-Farsi, the CEO. I am Zaid, a beloved son of the Most High God, and my balance sheet is now measured in eternal grace, not temporary profit. I pray that you, too, will examine your portfolio and choose the ultimate, infinite return.